yes to myself. But there's so much pressing work, deliberation, and discussion that we have to engage in. I'm your moderator for this section. Again, my name is Rick Adams. Hail from Pittsburgh. I have the distinct pleasure and honor to have been asked and given the responsibility to chair the board of directors, which I take seriously. And by chance, if I should stumble a little bit, Sister Nana Ross beats us, as Ron has mentioned. So I quickly come to my senses again and get myself together. This evening, we're going to have two presentations, and certainly we'll have time for interaction at different points in the program. First, we will have our founder, leader, visionary, my friend, my first babysitter, no. Dr. Ron Daniels, always catching with that one. President of the IBW, the Institute of Black World 21st Century, and he's going to lay out the context for us. The war on drugs is a war on us. And then, very special sister that when we met, we met her and didn't realize it. We were in the presence of greatness, and we didn't know. And that's when we were at a conference, and kind of appeared in the workshop, talked and everything, and then later we kind of figured out who you are. So that was kind of after the fact. And I'm talking about Sister Andrea James, founder and executive director of Justice is Healing, and we found out about this tremendous undertaking coming up in June. And so she's going to talk to us about the politics and policies of mass incarceration. If you don't know, I'm not going to say anything about what's going on in June because I know she will say what is going on. So without any further to do, I do want to call up the host of this magnificent institution, Brother Kareem Aziz. And let me just say, as Don Rojas pointed out, this is very special to me because we had two State of the Race conferences in the 90s. And this institution, I'd never heard of it, you know. So I was fascinated. And then when I see the name, Paul Lawrence Dunbar, and I see this citadel of African excellence and academia and intellectual prowess, I was just bowled over because we don't really have anything like this in Pittsburgh. And I dare say probably in a lot of cities you don't, or we don't. But Brother Kareem Aziz has been with us since the beginning. He is a member of the board of directors, and he's the director of institutional research here at Sojourner Douglas College. Brother, please come forward.
And I'm going to make this quick. First I want to say thank you and welcome to Sojourner Douglas College, the new safe house on the new Underground Railroad. We ain't nothing but a bunch of runaway slaves trying to teach our people how to be free. That's our job, that's our task. And we, Sojourner Douglas was created in 1972 as a experiment in community-based education. And we started with 12 students and a handful of volunteer faculty members in a parish house and 4 rooms. Today, we have a student population that approaches 2,000. We have centers in 6 cities in Maryland, Baltimore, Annapolis, Prince George's County, and Lanham, Cambridge, and Salisbury, and Owings Mills. And we also have a fully accredited branch campus in Nassau, Bahamas, our international campus. You are in the building that is our world headquarters. And in this building is our administrative services, our president's office, provost, my office, a series of other community outreach services, and some of the things that we do here. Around the corner on Central Avenue is our main academic hall, a school we able to snatch from the city and make it something that we can use. We serve an adult student population. Our average age is about 36. And our focus in our academic program is in how do we help our people take control of the conditions and circumstances that affect their lives. All of our degrees are oriented towards those kinds of ambitions and outcomes, and we view ourselves as an institution in partnership with the community, not separate from and apart from, but one that is directly emerging out of the interests and aspirations of our people in our communities and seeking to serve those folks' needs as best we can. Sojourner Douglas, again, engages directly in the community in a number of projects for economic and community development, and we are ambitious about the kind of ways that we reach out and do things different. A couple of years ago, we started a charter school, and so we serve kids, about 300 kids in that program, from pre-K through 8, and those youngsters, well, let me put it this way, they know who they are.
All right.
You know, I was at a father appreciation dinner Friday night, and Ray Winbush was the keynote speaker, professor from Morgan State University, a brilliant man, offered a intellectual but community-based presentation. The kids was like this. When we stopped for questions, the youngsters said, you know, now I heard you say about going to the museums, and we go all the time, but I think some museums may not be appropriate for some children, especially those that have those slavery exhibits. Great Blacks and Wax Museum here in Baltimore has a exhibit on the experience of enslavement that takes your heart away. And the youngster was very acute. The little lady got up behind him and says, "Why did they have slavery anyway?" And Ray answered her and talked with them about these things and expressed it. So I'm just saying, that's an illustration of the kind of one-on-one impact that we're having. And I'm going to get off the mic. Last thing I want to make mention of, we've also started a Black Boy Scout troop. This is my baby. It's my troop. You know, half the kids in it are my grandkids. You know, I got a bunch of grandkids. You know what I'm saying? And I'm scared to death for their lives and their future. You know, but we're doing it our way. We've discovered that Boy Scouts ain't really nothing but rites of passage. It was conceived from that in the first place. And when we looked at the history of scouting in our community, we found that Boy Scouting came to America in 1910. The first Black Boy Scouting troop was organized in 1911. By 1917, in Baltimore, there was an Afro article we used that cites how 500 kids were brought together for this event under the heading, the United Colored Scouts of Baltimore, in 1917, for an event to honor those scouts and scout leaders who had gone on to join the ancestors. How African is that? This is in 1917. The first Black Boy Scout troop didn't get recognized in Baltimore until 1926. These folks wasn't waiting for that. They said, we know what this is, we see what it does, we use this, we take advantage of this. Well, that's what we're doing in our initiative in these times. And we've initiated something we call the Ndugu Ngoma, the Brotherhood of the Drum, as a fraternal gathering of our youngsters to be a part of this, so that we're making Boy Scouts a cultural institution for the way we use it. So, just a little peep at you. You know, these are things that we're doing at Sojourner Douglas in ways that we can't do and wouldn't do anywhere else. And I've been here for 33 years. And I tell them they probably want to bury me next to that tree outside, because I don't want to. Y'all ain't gonna take me out of here. This is where we need to be. This is the kind of institution that we need, not just here, but everywhere we are. So again, welcome. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the history that you are a part of. You know, as Sojourner Truth said one time, Harry Tubman said one time, I freed 1,000 slaves, and I'd have freed 1,000 more if they just knew they were slaves. That's our job, is to teach us who we are and what we got to do to change those circumstances. Thank you very much.
I say my kind of college. That's what I think college should be about. All right. Next, my friend and colleague, mentor, leader. He's had me all over the country doing things. National Black Political Convention, 72 is probably the earliest. To the African American Progressive Network, to the Independent Black Political Party, to the Campaign New Tomorrow, running for president. And it's become now, I don't really get as phased as I used to. Sometimes Ron comes up with some deuces. I just sit there, I'll be like, we gonna do what? And the thing is, we do it. I mean, somehow we do it. He'll announce, we're gonna do something, and it's an effort that's worthy of $1 million. Now we got 100. But we do it, as he said earlier, guts and faith. And I follow this man anywhere because I put him with any leader, male, female, of any generation, in terms of his vision, his integrity. As they used to say about James Brown in the musical industry, he's the hardest working man for real in terms of organizing independent, progressive politics because he does so much. Things that probably some other folks would think they're too good to do. There's nothing this man won't do to see that we make our goals as a people and that the mission is fulfilled. So without any further ado, Brother Dr. Ron Daniels.
Thank you, son. Well, once again, I want to thank everyone for being here. Actually, I don't usually participate much in these events. I usually sort of play, actually, though I'm president of the organization, a kind of background role. But I thought it was important in this particular retreat to deviate from that pattern. Because I think we're at a critical moment in history. And we work with groups, all of you around the table. And one of the delightful things is many of you will meet each other for the first time, which is a part of what IBW is about, is that kind of connectivity. So I thought I would just share a few thoughts this evening, because I want people to be kind of clear about why we do this. And before we do that, again, I want to just thank, again, all of the resource persons for being here. Some of the people that we already thanked. I want to acknowledge that Dorothy Johnson-Spade has joined us. She made it through all that traffic. We got the Pittsburgh people, I guess they're MIA. I guess they're trying to find their way over here. That's Rick's responsibility, but I guess they'll be here soon. I also want to take a minute to thank the Open Societies Foundations for their support. We don't get a whole lot of help, but we get a little bit, and we appreciate that. As well as the Drug Policy Alliance. These two organizations have done a great deal to be at the cutting edge of trying to change some of the work that we're about. So I just want to get that out in front. I wanted to put this whole retreat within the context of the vision and mission of IBW.
Ron, excuse me 1 second. Dr. Prim wasn't here earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Arnell Prim is also here with me. I wanted to put this retreat, this activity that we'll be involved in for the next few days, next couple of days, within the context of the vision and mission of IBW. And that is to understand first and foremost who we are as an organization, as an entity. Because sometimes that's kind of, what is this IBW? Because you're all working with it. Well, IBW is progressive. It's a term that's tossed about a great deal. What does progressive mean? For me, it means that we are about race. That is to say, we believe in the whole concept of race as an impediment to our progress. But we also deal with class. That is to say that we are an entity that has a philosophical orientation. That orientation is one that deals with the notion of ending racial oppression, economic exploitation, particularly within the context of, dare I say, a capitalist political economy, but also eradicating all of the isms. So therefore, we're opposed to gender inequality. We're opposed to the oppression of people on the basis of sexual orientation. Progressive means that even though we are black and we are about black people, we also are about eradicating the exploitation of all people, because that is centered within the concept of who we are in terms of my. So we're progressive, but we are also African-centered. By that I mean we start with ourselves. We believe that charity begins at home and spreads abroad. We believe that the historic background, the historic traditions of African people going all the way back to the beginning of mankind constitute a vital essence of who we are as a people. That, as Karenga has put it in putting forth Kawaida, the doctrine of tradition and reason, we're not trying to go back into the past, but we want to extrapolate from our history those things that Fannie Lou Hamer would call the bridges that brought us over. The values of community, the values of familyhood, the values of sharing, the values of environment, the values of humanism that really constitute the essence of who we are, and spirituality that constitute who we are as African people. Now, that doesn't mean that other people don't have the same values. They may express themselves in other kinds of ways, but that's who we are. That's the base from which we come. Almost all human beings begin from a base of who they are and expand outwards. And we're always prepared to express and move outwards. So IBW is progressive, African-centered, and we are a resource center. We're not a mass-based organization. We don't have members per se, but we're a resource center. And as a resource center, and this is very important because as I talk about the kind of work that we do and the kind of work that I have personally about at this stage of my life, having raised this young man and nurtured him and brought him up, trying to mentor him into understanding the nature of what the world is all about at this stage. It is about having looked back over life and to say, what are some of the most important things that we can do as black people? And as I was sharing, as Brother Kenny and I and others were having a conversation the other day, some of them are not that brilliant. They're fundamental. And that is the notion that we as black people need to, in fact, be sharing with each other. That we need to be networking with each other. That we need to collaborate within the framework of that progressive, African-centered orientation. Very simple. It's not very profound. The collaboration. And learning from each other. We can learn from each other. All of it is not in textbooks. We, in fact, have lived the textbook. Our experiences constitute a textbook, and we can learn from each other. And what IBW is, what we strive to be, is a good faith facilitator, a very underappreciated concept. It takes a certain skill and experience to bring people together, because we got to deal with, in fact, almost every meeting. I'm glad the president of the National Association of Psychologists will be here pretty soon. Nana Pat is here, because we need a psychiatrist and a psychologist in every meeting.
All right.
Because we're suffering from all kinds of trauma. And it acts out, it plays itself out in various kind of ways. You could be having a successful gathering and somebody will throw something negative in because we're just so used to being negative. We're so used to being beaten down. And we who are Africans in America, and I won't have time to go into this, are perhaps the most troubled. Because Malcolm X said we didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us.
All right.
He said of all the crimes committed by Europeans against Africans, the greatest was to take our names. And we underestimate what that means, because that means cultural aggression. Only Africans in America suffered the whole phenomenon of cultural aggression to the extent that we did. We do not know our name. Culture is the stuff that make a people stick. And when you take people's culture away from them, or try, And when you disaggregate them and you separate them in terms of their ethnicity so that they can't communicate, you take away their religion, their musical instruments, their language, and that is cultural aggression. So ever since we've been here, we've been trying to create this new African community. It's a wonder that we have survived at all.
All right, tell it.
But we have, because we are indeed a special people. And so we try to be a good faith facilitator, working in these various efforts to try to make sure that we make some meaningful progress. Now, we unapologetically of the race and for the race. And I say that because today, the notion of colored has become the new whatever. I don't know what the colored thing is now. This whole new colored thing. People of color. I'm with people of color. I'm not against that. But we are unapologetically of the race and for the race. We are for the liberation of people of African descent, the sons and daughters and survivors of the Holocaust of enslavement and subsequent racial oppression. I say that because on this war on drugs, you know, Frederick Douglass and others said, you know, we are tired of others speaking on behalf of us. Maybe we should stop speaking so much on behalf of others.
All right.
Who can have their own voice. Now, I'm prepared to, you know, I'm not opposed to us, but you know, when I look at the data, I was looking at some data the other day on wealth, and people are saying blacks and Latinos. And I'm not saying this negatively, but when I look at the chart, it's mostly blacks.
Right.
Most of this impact is disproportionately hitting black people. And that's not by accident, because in fact, there's a certain gradation here, right? You know, and the whole notion of the history of racism, it goes from black to white. And we don't need a scientific study to sort of articulate. It's very simple. If you're white, you're all right. Yellow, mellow. Brown, stick around. And black, get back. So if you're Latino and dark, you're at the bottom.
Right.
And people know that. The whole notion of white privilege is still a part of how things work. So again, I don't mean that in any hostile way. We are for the liberation of all people. But there's a way in which I hear people talking about, well, you know, people of color are moving back to North Carolina. They don't really mean that. They mean black people are moving back. Why can't we just say that? I mean, why can't we just embrace who we are? And still work with Latinos, work with Asians, but we kind of diluting the whole thing of who we are as a people. That's not good. That's not healthy for us. Certainly not healthy for our children, for those who come behind us. And again, we stand on the side of all oppressed people. I want to make that clear. And it's been a long road towards freedom. A long road towards freedom. But despite the fact that we have a black family in the White House, and of course that is a great accomplishment, but there's been those who've been talking about the post-racial society. But we know that because Indira Gandhi many years ago became the first woman prime minister of India, did that mean that sexual oppression and sexual, abuse and all that disappeared in India? Because it's deeply embedded structurally in the culture and in the nature of society. And so that's not there's no contradiction there. We're proud of the fact that Barack Obama and his wife, that they're in the White House. We help contribute. They would not be there without the long struggle that we put forth. And they also hopefully remember that. But it does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that therefore race has disappeared. Race still matters. Race and racism still matters in this society. In fact, we have an unfinished civil rights, human rights agenda. That's why we come to this proposition. As you say in our readings, I just reiterate this because you hear us talking about that. There are two black Americas, separate and unequal. Kerner Commission report in 1968 said there were two Americas, separate and unequal. We have two black Americas now, separate and unequal. Because there are those who have benefited from the civil rights, human rights movement, who have become quite successful. You know, we have black people everywhere, artists, athletes, heads of corporations, all over the place. You see successful black people. And that's a good thing. Problem is some of those who are successful have kind of forgotten from whence they've come. That can be problematical.
Well,
Some who don't want to really remember from whence they come unless they get into difficulty. They get stopped by the police, or something happens. Then all of a sudden, their amnesia slips, and they get an instant reintroduction to being black. That happens every time. So we have black people who are in the outer burbs and the suburbs. We fought for that access. We fought for the right to move out and do what we wanted to do in that regard. However, there's that other black America. It is America's dark ghettos. It's the places that have been left behind. We are sitting in the middle of one of them. Working class black people, poor black people, all across this country, who are left in the urban inner city areas where there is a high degree of joblessness. A high degree, and joblessness about not just underemployment, not just unemployment. Joblessness means that people have stopped even looking for work. In New York City, according to the Community Service Society, young black men in the from ages of 30 under, 50% are jobless. That is a state of emergency. And then you have all the other maladies and dysfunction that come from that as well. These are America's dark ghettos. And let me suggest to you that because, we need a context here. We're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. We're doing it because when we sit around the table, we feel the pain of our people. We feel the pain, those of us who are doing this work. We have to remind ourselves that we are where we are because there was a great civil rights, human rights revolution, one of the great revolutions in this country, but there was also a counter-revolution. Not unlike the post-Reconstruction that happened after Reconstruction, where there was an effort to roll things back. It was simply called the white backlash. When people began to think that, well, wait a minute, these black people have gained too much. They've gone too far. They're now impinging upon white rights, whatever that is. And Ronald Reagan was sort of spearheading that effort. I mean, Nixon got off into it a little bit too. But Ronald Reagan, more than anybody else, he was an actor. He never, ever got an Academy Award as an actor, but he deserves an Academy Award of the century as President of the United States because he fooled a whole lot of black people. He persuaded white people who were even that black people were their enemies. That somehow these social programs, somehow the war on poverty, the Great Society, the model cities, that these programs were just for black people, welfare cheats and food stamp cheats, and and the image was of black people, and then all the criminality. Y'all remember Willie Horton, right? Y'all remember all this being perpetrated, and the whole notion of of affirmative action being what? Black racism. That's an oxymoron. I mean, there's no such thing as black racism or reverse racism. Because these people are now discriminating against you, and it was a design, so it was a historical divide and exploit. So therefore, poor white working class people who were benefiting from the same programs, in fact, more so in absolute numbers than black people, turned around and cut their own throats because it was black people who were the enemy. That's the white backlash. So what we see in our communities today is massive disinvestment. Saw on the show the other day, finally, and I talk about this all the time, but then I'm not on them shows. So my historical memory is not reflected among the young scholars and activists. Somebody finally said the other day something about CETA. I said, that's right. There was once a program called the Comprehensive and Training Employment Act. That was out there once. The Joint Partnership and Training Act, Job Corps, these were programs.
That's right.
Housing, all the community development block grants, much bigger than they are today.
All the cities.
All these programs. These were programs, and we as young radicals and activists, we called them reform programs. We were even somewhat opposed to them because they were not sufficiently revolutionary. Now we wish we had some of those programs. Because that coupled with deindustrialization, because we have to have a context. Work has disappeared in the black community. There are no factories and foundries. In Youngstown, Ohio, where I grew up, Youngstown was the 4th largest steel producing center in the world. It lost 22,000 steel jobs overnight. I came out of the Hill District of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, #1 steel producing center in the world. It ain't that way no more. When we were in the Hill District, people used to fight. Gangs is not new. Banging is not new. We used to do it in the Hill District. I was involved in it. We had little switchblades. We had little zip guns, mostly bricks, bottles, and so forth. Then when you were 11th grade, you didn't graduate, but you went to 11th grade, and you went down into the steel mills, and even in the segregated steel mill, because you couldn't go to the top jobs, you could still make in those days what might be today equivalent of $15 an hour. And you put that foolishness behind you, and you laughed about the stuff that you used to do, because now you could raise your family because you had a job. Those jobs don't exist anymore. But there's a new employer in town. There's a new employer in town. Because now what we know is that that drugs became the new economy in the black community. Disinvestment, deindustrialization, no jobs, new jobs. New jobs become then, therefore, people involved in this traffic. And unlike the old days, you know, when there was zip guns and at Max, I didn't even see many of them, really, but they couldn't do nothing with them. The bullet would bounce off you. You shot a zip gun, pop a little switchblade. Every now and then somebody would get cut a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, there was never deadly force. But with this new traffic, you can afford an AK-47. You can afford an AR-30, whatever, all that weaponry, which means that the disputes that used to be, you fight it out now are boom, boom, boom. They're now gunfights and deadly fratricide because of this new illicit traffic, so-called, in the black community. The root cause, however, is not something we created. It's not something that we did. It was because of this white backlash in our communities. So we have this state of emergency in America's dark ghettos. Born of the white backlash, assault on civil rights, the whole notion of reverse racism, black racism, massive disinvestment, deindustrialization, the new economy, which is drugs, and then, of course, they gave us the war on drugs. The war on drugs. And we're here to talk about the war on drugs, but understand the context of the war on drugs. The war on drugs was a substitute for, in fact, finishing the unfinished civil rights, human rights agenda. And in fact, it was interesting, Ron, and we were on this panel a couple of weeks ago, and we did this we were part of this little book, and so I'm just be patient. I'm gonna quote myself, if you don't mind. All right. I'll quote myself real quick. It said, the war on drugs, perhaps more than any other single factor, has contributed to the current wave of, this is police brutality, because out there son of a constitutional rights stand, and misconduct. As one commentator put it, the war on drugs is a war on us. When the highly addictive and relatively inexpensive drug, crack cocaine, burst onto the market in the 1980s, it set off an alarm bell in the law enforcement community at all levels. No one can deny that many impoverished inner city communities were racked by dramatic increases in crime, violence, fratricide as drug dealers, large and small, and rival gangs battle for control over the illicit drug economy. It is important to note that the rise in crack trafficking in inner city communities, however, coincided with the calculated de-emphasis on urban policy and systematic gutting of social and economic support programs designed to ameliorate the plight of poor and working people, the disproportionate numbers of whom were black and people of color. Calculated. This is not an accident. This is, in fact, what? The new Jim Crow. Right. We now know that it was targeted, not an accident, that this happened. And so, our task, as we approach it as we approach it from the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, there's some people who are, they're libertarians. I don't have a problem with it. They want a right to smoke drugs. They want a right to do whatever they want to do with drugs. That's their right. I mean, that's okay. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. That's not why we are motivated by this. We're motivated because we want to heal black families and black communities. That's our task. Yeah. We want to heal black families and communities because our families and communities have been racked and have been devastated and destroyed. And so what does that mean? It means that we do education and public awareness. We did the town hall meetings. Many of you are aware of the town hall meetings that we did in the 3 cities, in Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C. But we knew that was not enough just to talk about education and awareness. We also then sought to organize. And we took the next step. That next step was to say, well, wait a minute, can we get black organizations in these communities who are doing similar work? Because this is also the part of the malady. That black people doing exactly the same work in the same city do not often talk to each other. They don't communicate. They're not in touch with each other, let alone across the country. And so we did something very simple. We said, will you be willing in Baltimore, Washington, and D.C., and now Philadelphia, to come to the table, share ideas, learn from each other, and then figure ways and means to, in fact, act around policy change and act about how do we overcome, act about how we heal black families and communities. We're also engaging Black Family Summit, the organizations affiliated with the Black Family Summit. Again, many of them are here today, the sociologists, the All Healers Alliance, the psychiatrists, and others who are associated with that. Why? Because they can also educate their memberships about this. But they're also critical because they're healers. They know how to heal. They know how to come into the community and help repair the broken spirit of black people. So their role is vital in the overall process. So we've dealt with issues like racial profiling. Cool question to ban the box, because you know that one of the other things that happen is you go to prison, you do your time, you come out, you have done your time, and now you can't get a job because you got to mark the box that says whether or not you ever have been arrested or not. By the way, arrested, whether or not you did the time, arrested. In Washington, D.C., the disparity study said the black people around marijuana, they are being disproportionately arrested. Once you are arrested, the question is, have you ever been arrested? So therefore you have a mark. You did the time, but now you're doing double jeopardy because you've been arrested. Decriminal marijuana, whatever your position is on weed, fact of the matter is, everybody's smoking weed. Everybody's smoking weed, but we going to jail for smoking weed. Disproportionately because that's the new Jim Crow. We are being targeted. The war on drugs is a war on us. And so the whole question of decriminalization becomes an incredibly important part of our work. And then we have to also look at the question of regulation. We have to stretch our minds to at least debate whether or not the whole question of drugs itself ought to be seen differently. It was once a time that alcohol was banned. It was prohibited, but then people came to a different conclusion about it. They regulated it. They treated it as a public health issue and dealt with it in terms of treatment. So maybe we ought to have that conversation as well. And then we in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, some of us just come back from Seattle, Washington, looking at a radical alternative called the law enforcement assisted diversion, where, like people even who have been addicted and who are, they get diverted. They don't go into the system. They get treatment on demand. They get wraparound services. The whole paradigm is how do we heal people? I mean, that's kind of revolutionary in America. Because it's like punishment. If you go to jail, you can't have a television. You ain't allowed to exercise. Punish them. Now, henceforth and forevermore. Lock them up. Put them in solitary confinement. I mean, we are into that to some degree too. So we as black people need to examine who we are, because it's about. And Dorothy Spate sat here right at this table, and she just said, look, we with mothers in charge, we go to prisons and we see people who have murdered our sons and daughters, and yet we see them as human beings because we know that they too have been traumatized. Doesn't mean that they don't have pain around that, but they understand fundamentally what has happened to us as a people. That takes incredible courage, incredible compassion, and in fact, Africanness in terms of who we are as a people. Right. So we're not just in this because we want to end the war on drugs. We want to heal black people, heal black families, because we are under assault. We've been under assault. And it will take more than just ending the war. Ending the war on drugs is just a means to an end. It is not the end for we who are in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. So Africans and Americans, what I'm trying to say is we must be in the lead of a new movement that heals ourselves, heals our families, and heals our communities. At the end of the day, even if the war on drugs were to end today, how do we overcome the damages? The damages that have been done to us because of this war on drugs, the calculated damage that has been done through callousness and calculated damage. So it's really about a broader movement. It's about, you know, us feeling and connecting people as we have done. This is a movement in this room.
Right.
We're connecting with each other. We got to get to know each other. Your extended family. Doesn't mean you're surrendering your organizational sovereignty and what you do. No, that's not what it's about. It's about knowing that we have each other's back. It's about knowing that we can call on each other. It's about knowing that we sit around these tables in various places and we're sharing problems. We're learning about these problems. We're suffering. We feel the pain, but we act on the pain. Bringing whatever we have to the table. Sometimes it's just a little bit. Sometimes it's just some compassion. Sometimes it's skill. Sometimes it's will. But it is about us as African people loving each other, sharing with each other, and having a determination that we are not going to let anybody turn us around in terms of this great quest of finishing the unfinished civil rights, human rights agenda. In this piece called Police Brutality, which I was kind enough, I had an opportunity to contribute to 14 years ago. Because when you look at some of this stuff, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
All right.
I concluded by saying this. Unless and until this nation makes a firm and irreversible commitment to ensure that all the people who live in this society will enjoy access to the same social and economic rights, good jobs, quality education, housing, health care, clean environment, that doesn't happen. Instability and violence and crime will continue to be problems that no amount of policing or prisons can contain for long. As community-based organizations, civil rights and human rights organizations, and public interest advocacy groups struggle against police brutality and misconduct, and we just translate that to mean the war on drugs and racially biased criminal justice policies, the fight to create a new paradigm of these things, new paradigms, must necessarily be seen as a part of a broader struggle to create a just and humane society. This ain't just about, can I smoke a joint? This ain't just about, can I go in a room and shoot up? Now, we can look at that from a different way, but that's not what I'm necessarily concerned about. It is about the broader question of creating a just and humane society. Therefore, the demand for police accountability and reform, and for the end on the war on drugs, I'm sort of interpreting this now, must necessarily be coupled with the demand for public policies that promote social, economic, and racial justice. Our goal must be nothing short of creating a just and humane and peaceful society. Because if there is no justice, there will be no peace in these United States of America. In fact, when Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, this is what Martin Luther King was fighting for. An economic bill of rights to make sure that all human beings had a job, good jobs, good wages, education, health care, housing. That's what the whole march, the Poor People's Campaign was about. That was the essence of it before he was assassinated, before he was killed. People forget that. But that's what we must also advocate, because at the end of the day, if we're not talking about that, we're not going to heal our communities. And it takes three things as I take my seat. First of all, we must ask ourselves, what must we do for ourselves? Whether it's organizing a Boy Scout troop, whether it's having Fathers Incorporated, where somebody like Kenny Brazil is going across this country, and I heard him tell the other story of one person at a time. Someone he met that was really having trouble. He just took time with that one person. Of course, we need to obviously, like you said, ramp that up. But we need to ask what we can do for ourselves. That is a part of the equation. Second part of it is, what do we do? And this is about the resistance that we must have. What must we do to challenge the private sector institutions? How do we let Florida kill our sons and malign our daughters?
Right.
And we decide that we can just keep going to Disneyland and drinking orange juice and having, how do we do that? When we have the power in our hands to bring it to a halt.
Yes.
We have to have a spirit of resistance. We have to challenge here in this city across. We have to challenge these private sector corporations. We put our money in their banks. We are their consumers. They have an obligation to reinvest in our communities.
That's right.
And lastly, public policy. This is challenging in this era, but we have to march on ballot boxes. We have to organize our people. If they're telling us we can't vote, we're saying no. You can't tell us that we're not going to vote.
That's right.
We don't care what you do to us. If you're going to pass these laws saying we have to be identified, then we'll identify. We'll make sure everybody's. You are not going to stop us from marching on ballot boxes. Because too many people bled and suffered and died. I'm not just saying that rhetorically on that bridge in Selma, Alabama. They bled for that. And it means that if we're organized in a way that others are not organized, we can carry forth with great strength and power to change public policy. Big challenge, but we've got to be involved in that one as well. So I conclude by saying it is really about healing our black families and our communities. Healing our families and communities. And at the end of the day, that proposition is one that will not just be for us. Because quite frankly, the real deal is, and we're seeing this in North Carolina with Reverend William Barber, with the Moral Mondays. Yeah. See, when black people stand up, when black people are in our right minds, when we are, in fact, not allowing ourselves to be wagged by the dog. I mean, in a sense, like, let's hold this debate about the N-word. Is it N-E-R or N-A? I mean, come on, it's all insane. Come on. I mean, when we decide that we are in charge, we decide that we will conduct ourselves with justice and righteousness, then what happens is not only do we lead ourselves, all of the world righteously kneels at our feet. And they follow in a progressive way. That's what's happening with these Moral Mondays. Reverend William Barber is like all kind of people. White people, Asians, Republicans, all kind of people are following because why? We as black people are standing up with a vision. Because they say, well, there's no vision, the people perish. And we have to have a vision. And Reverend William Barber is showing that. That's who we are. So when we gather around this table and you meet each other and embrace each other and share information with each other, as black professional organizations and as collaboratives, understand who you are, understand the context, understand the mission. Because we say a luta continua, a luta continua. The struggle continues until it is finished, and we will not turn around until it is finished.
Right.